Mr. Revolver Guy with dayattherange.com. Thank you for joining me in episode 3 of a mini-series and comparing the Kimber K6s stainless revolver to the Smith and Wesson Model 640. For those of you that have been along on the journey of this particular mini-series, you know that previously I compared it to a Paxton Quigley in episode 2, Smith and Wesson Model 640. Today, we have the Smith and Wesson Model 640 Magnum Centennial on the bench with us, along with, again, the RCBS trigger gauge and the Hornady caliper. But before we get started, the customary safety check. Kimber K6s, 6 shots, all clear. And there's no ammo on the bench, by the way. Then you have the Smith and Wesson Model 640-1 Magnum Centennial, 5 shot, all clear. Again, those of you that started this journey with me on episode 1 understand how I came to this conclusion. And again, in this episode, I want to thank my partner, my long-term friend, for loaning me these precious model Smith and Wesson 640s to compare to the Kimber K6s. Now, let's get started with the Smith and Wesson Model 640, which is what we're here for today. This particular Smith and Wesson Model 640, it's a 640-1. It is the Magnum Centennial version with 38 special and 357 Magnum capabilities. As you can see, it is a stainless round butt 3-screw J-frame that was introduced in 1995. The Magnum version has a little bit larger frame than the traditional J-frame with a reinforced cylinder stop. Of course, for the additional horsepower, if you will, or additional capacity of the 357 Magnum for the frame to be able to handle that load. Again, this is a 5-shot cylinder. As you can see, again, safe. It sports a 2/8-inch barrel with a pinned, ramped front black sight. And as with traditional J-frames, it has the embedded rear sight into the frame, as my dad would say, the horse trough in the frame. It has a smooth, I don't know if the camera can pick that up, smooth trigger face, smooth trigger face. Now with this particular 357 Magnum, as you can see, it is round butt, has no serrations on the back like the Kimber K6. With this particular J-frame, we always talk about the smoothness of trigger pull. And with this particular J-frame, though it does not stand up to the Performance Center model reviewed in episode 2, it does have a rather smooth trigger pull. The one thing I noticed, it almost feels like a 2-stage, if you will, on an AR, where there's definitely a catch here. Some prefer this in revolvers. It is not a traditional 2-stage. That's not what it's called inside a revolver. Most of us refer to it as the ability to stage the trigger. Consistent every time. You can get there every time. You can feel the notch on every pull. Some prefer that, some do not. I am indifferent, though I do believe I shoot a little bit better with the staging, if you will, in this particular revolver. So we're going to get down to business. I believe this will turn out to be the same measurements as the Paxton Quigley reviewed in episode number 2. So we're going to take the width at the widest point, and the width at the widest point on this particular J-frame, 1.3 inches, as you can see there. On the Kimber K6, remember this has smooth or flats that Kimber has milled into the cylinder. And that too comes in at 1.3 inches. Again, I've made this point before in the previous episode and when reviewing this revolver. What's amazing about it is those flats enabled 6 shots without adding to the girth of this revolver. It enables 6 shots in this particular cylinder. In episode 3, I'm not going to perform the trigger gauge pull on the Kimber K6s. You've seen that in episode 1. That's in an attempt to keep the video footage short and not bore you to death with the same thing over and over. But we will take 3 pulls of the trigger gauge here. One last thing that I did in previous episodes was also measure the sight radius, which I'll do before proceeding on to the trigger. The sight radius on this particular revolver, 4.1 inches. Let's do that again to make sure. From front sight to rear notch, yes, 4.1 inches. So now we'll get down to business and we will take 3 pulls of the Smith and Wesson Model 640-1 Magnum Centennial. Again, in the previous episode, remember that Paxton Quigley model was only capable of 38 special. This is 38 special and 357 Magnum capabilities, or the Magnum Centennial as known by Smith and Wesson's portfolio. Let's get down to business. Trigger testing. So, first trigger pull comes in at 12 pounds, the same as the previous model or the Paxton Quigley edition. The difference between these models, again, just to drive home the point, it does has a noticeable stop. Some will refer to it as a catch. I refer to it as being able to stage the trigger. Now, 2 more trigger pulls, and we'll wrap this up and head out to the range for some testing. This particular trigger pull came in at 11 pounds. Last trigger pull, let's reset it. This particular trigger pull came in at about 11.5 pounds. So for the Smith and Wesson Model 640 Magnum Centennial, I'm going to call it at 11.5 pounds. The one thing that I will say is these grips that we have on here, the inlaid wood grips from Smith and Wesson, I believe these were made by Uncle Mike's, I believe. These grips feel much better than the rubber grips on the Kimber K6. And as you can see, my mitts or hands are very large. And as you can see, my pinky hangs off there. And I believe that's why I happen to shoot this one a little bit better, because the pinky is not dangling off of the grip. And also on the Smith and Wesson Model 640 Paxton Quigley, my pinky finger also dangles down there at the bottom. Here on this particular model, as you can see, with a high grip, it's a really firm grip, feels really stable. Smith and Wesson really got it right when they added these Uncle Mike wood round butt grips to the Magnum Centennial version. Please stick around for testing, as we are going to go forward from here for range day with all three revolvers. On range day, we will be using the chronograph to capture feet per second, standard deviation, and extreme spread. We'll be testing for reliability, accuracy, and the subjective perceived recoil by all three models, only displaying two here on the bench, but we will be testing all three on the range for those specifics. Stay tuned for range testing of episode 4 and episode 5 of the Paxton Quigley edition with dayattherange.com.